first TIE Talk yesterday was about just-in-time teaching, and if you missed it, it will go onto the Blackboard website for the TIE Collaborative. If you do not have access to it, it has been an oversight on my part, and simply email me to let me know. Today's talk is closing the gap between under and fully resourced students. And when you think about that, we have to think about how our students need to be resourced in many nuanced ways that we were talking about yesterday with the TRIO program. It's not just who does and doesn't have the cash. As an undergraduate, none of us had cash, right? But really resources that we may not even be aware of in terms of being able to interact with adults. You know, there are a lot of 18-year-olds who couldn't look us in the eye. And so I'm really excited about this talk and introducing Dr. Cowan. She was a postdoc in the first lab that I worked in, and we lost touch for many years, and came back together at an American Society for Microbiology meeting where we began talking. She's been involved with education for many years, including the Division W, which is the Education Division of American Society for Microbiology, as well as authoring two very popular microbiology textbooks. She is at the University of Cincinnati, Middletown right now as the campus director, although she's done many different things. And so she has worked much of her career with students who are fully capable but are under-resourced or need a little extra pulling or pushing in many different ways. And so I'm so excited that she's here, and we've had some really amazing conversations with faculty and TRIO and school. And so we are hoping to have her come back on a probably annual cycle when it's cold and snowy in Cincinnati. And beautiful here, right? So thank you very much.
It really has. This has been one of the best trips I've ever taken. I am not really familiar with the Southwest, and it's beautiful, and this campus is beautiful. And as my talk yesterday, I was a little nervous about the topics I was talking about, which are really focused on under-resourced students. And I thought, oh, it's Arizona State. They won't have any under-resourced students. And I don't want to engage in schadenfreude, but I'm kind of glad that you do, so at least that you'll find something I say useful, I hope. I just want to add a little bit so you know where I'm coming from. I am by no means an expert on my topic. Sorry, that's why I didn't ask for an honorary, but I'm just constantly learning about it, and I'm constantly amazed at what I don't know about our students and what many of us don't know about our students. So I've had the traditional career path. I was a research scientist at Miami University in Ohio for 23 years. But I also came to be an administrator at an open access regional campus of Miami University. And so that was my first experience with open access. And by that we mean GED or high school diploma. And I spent many years teaching introductory microbiology to first-year freshmen with no science background, no biology, no chemistry, no nothing. That began the next phase of my life, from being the very aggressive research scientist to saying, I was just flummoxed semester after semester after semester on how to reach these students and have them move the needle by the time they leave my class. And that, I'm stubborn. I think that's my primary personality trait, and I latched onto that problem. And it took me for a ride, and I'm still on that ride. And so I know many of you are probably more advanced than I am in this area. But so after doing that for many years, learning more about under-resourced students, first-generation college students, English as a second language learners. I got involved with a nonprofit in town that works with at-risk elementary and high school students, so I could learn some of the background. And then I left Miami because I wanted to peel some more layers off of that onion, and that's why I'm at Cincinnati State Technical and Community College, which has demographics where 95% of the students are fully Pell eligible. And the average age is 29, and they are definitely the first person in their family to go to college. And many of them, again, I'm learning and just amazed at what I don't know. At talking to our students, I asked them, so why didn't you go across town to Miami University's regional campus, which has been here for 40 years? This is a new campus. They said, I could never do that. It was just too far a leap for them. Plus, here's another thing we don't realize, it's too far away. It's the same city, it's the same little town with 40,000 people, and it's on the other side of town. I don't leave my side of town. A lot of that is because they don't have transportation, and a lot of it is because they just don't leave their side of town. We're 40 minutes from Cincinnati, we're 40 minutes from Dayton, Ohio. A lot of my students have never been to either city. That's the kind of thing that I'm learning about that with my middle class lenses, I haven't been able to appreciate in the past. Then just to finish up my Dante-like move up and down is I started counseling in the Hamilton County Jail, which is a Cincinnati jail, and working with reentry people. Because as soon as I feel like, wow, I didn't know this about this, I feel like I'm drawn to find out some more and to find out how we can help people at various levels. So that's the mess of my career trajectory. And what I want to talk about is fairly specific, is because our college classrooms are middle-class environments. Now, you would never that's not the way you would describe a college classroom. You would say lots of things about it, but what it is, it might be the first middle-class experience that some of our students have. And because we grew up, we were born with, most of us, these middle-class contact lenses on. We don't even realize that we have contact lenses that we can take off and look at things differently. So, my talk is about in a classroom situation that uses any amount of technology. There's some very, very easy things that you can do that help, that actually boost under-resourced, underprepared students, that if you do it the opposite way, can really put up barriers. And I'm sure once you think about it, you will recognize that. So just to, beat this dead horse, nationwide, this is all public universities. So that ranges from the most elite to the least elite. 58% of American students are on federal financial aid, which means they are about 1.5x over the poverty limit. 40% of it. So we like to think we know what college students are, but we don't. 40% are part-time, 84% live off campus, 30% nationwide are non-white, and I'm not sure what your percentages here are. So I'm talking about underprepared learners and under-resourced learners, but I'm glad Pam brought it up to remind me. I'm talking about underprepared and under-resourced in all kinds of ways, obviously financially, but in social capital, in experience, in culture, and I mean under with reference to the middle class. I would probably rather say other. And Pam and I were talking, there are all kinds of, even in elite colleges, there are all kinds of people who are other, like even gifted students, who might have, in their K through 12 would have had an IEP because they had issues that complemented their giftedness. And so in the end, these techniques tend to be inclusive rather than exclusive, and maybe that's the language that I should have used. So I thank you to Google University. I was able to access some facts about your state from the Board of Regents website. So fewer than 50% of Arizona's high school graduates meet the requirements for the 3 universities in the state. So you're not even seeing that other 50%. But even among university first years, 77% qualified for freshman English, so they need some degree of developmental study, and 65% qualified for what we call college level math. So we know that those who don't start in those courses have a significantly decreased chance in succeeding. Okay, this is the money slide. What we're going to talk about on this slide is the basis for what my thesis is going to be. So remember, I mean under-resourced in many different ways, and you know, other kinds of learners might, and this is obviously not true. Not every single one of them is true for every student, but I want you to consider problems you've had in your classroom, your many students, and see if you don't recognize some of these traits. They might lack bridging relationships and social capital, which you could summarize by saying knowing someone else who has succeeded in college, knowing someone else who can help them set a goal and reach a goal. In the town where my college is, Cincinnati State, 40% of adults do not have employment. Now that's not the unemployment rate, because these people, many of them never had employment. And so not only are they first generation college students, they're first generation aspirators, that's a science term, aspirational. That's a lack of bridging relationships and social capital. Often students in these circumstances view right now as much more important than the future. Delayed gratification is not a good survival strategy in their circumstances. They need to make sure that what's happening right now is what's happening right now. And you can imagine what that would do when you're planning on an exam for next week, or your car is broken down. This one is really interesting, and I've thought about it many times since I discovered it. And I have references for all this. Is not me. I have references for all this. They have difficulties organizing space and finding appropriate start and stop places in material. This is something that middle class learners learned how to do in 2nd grade and haven't thought about it since. But organizing space, even if you look in the backpack of one of our students who's first generation, and no wonder they haven't done something on time. And that's a very crass example, but the space, their notes on a page, what's in their backpack, what's in their homes, how's their home arranged, in order to have some kind of continuity and predictability. And the same thing with finding appropriate start and stop places in reading material, for instance. Now, this is a student from my campus, Emily Verano, and one thing I'm sure you know, that when you have students from these categories who do succeed, they are the best ambassadors in the world towards other students who they think that can do the same thing. So this is a student, she's a 2nd-year student, she's got a 4.0, she's got several kids and other life issues. But she figured out, so she's in her 4th semester, she figured out pretty early on that her classmates, they would get assignments from their teachers or papers or whatever, and they just throw them in their backpack. And so on the first week of the semester, she plops herself down it's a very small campus, it's one high-rise building, and she plops herself down on the first floor in the lounge and sends out on Facebook, new students, come see me if you need help organizing your class materials. It's such a basic thing, and it's such a beautiful thing that she recognized that that's neat. Because she sees people in class just wadded up stuff, and right now I got to go pick up my kids from daycare, so I'll throw that in there, and you get home and you don't know what's happening. Organizing materials, so I wanted to highlight her. Students might have an underdeveloped short-term memory, not a lot of experience in honing their learning memory. Another skill we take for granted by the time we are where we are is constructing strategies for problem solving. Differing views of accuracy. Close, but no cigar. Close. What might, have you had students ask you, but I have this, or it's not, it's not where it needs to be. Remember this is Mike, believe more strongly in fate than in choice. That's external assignation of responsibility. Well, I could never do that anyway, or I would have been there except there was a traffic jam, or it's always, it wasn't me, my responsibility, or choices I made, but things that happened to me. It's a developmental stage, it's a different cultural attitude. And they might have poor sorting skills, mental models. This one is sounds so pedantic, but it's so true. And Brian was talking about this, smaller vocabulary. And I'm not talking, we all know that science and math, communications, have huge new lists of vocabulary, and often we pay attention to that. But I'm talking about everyday words. You've all heard the statistics of people who weren't read to, or people in high income versus low income households who grow up, they are read to much less often as children, if at all, and they end up hearing, the well-resourced families, the kids end up hearing millions of words by the time they're 5, and the under-resourced family hear, 20,000 words. These are everyday words. I've probably already used hundreds of words that would not be understood by these students. It's not their fault. It's something we can address if we're aware of it. Okay, so this is what I'm looking, the lens I use, the prism I use to look at what we do in the classroom. So, this is my thesis. Technologies can either help or harm. This is just a little talking about if we do. Almost everybody uses flipping to some extent, even if you don't call it that. If you're using a learning management system and there's materials outside of class that they have to access or turn in online, that's a partially flipped classroom. It's a use of technology. And I'm going to talk a little bit about fully online classes, which was also a little intimidating when I'm coming to ASU. Online capital of the world, but what the heck? So just in case you've been living under a rock for the last 5 years, the teaching technique du jour, the name du jour is flipping. And it really means anything that gets the students the facts before class, so that we can do what we do best as teaching professionals. Weave those facts into their current knowledge base, connect different kinds of facts, demonstrate how you learn the material, let them use other activities in the classroom because you have time to do that. I maintain that we tried to do this as long as there's been teaching. Read the chapter before you come to class. That's flipping.
I have been under a rock. I have never heard the phrase before.
Well, that was very brave of you to self-disclose.
Sometimes, a lot of times, they won't do that, so you have to do it for them. Spend the first 5 minutes of class.
See, well, that's what I refuse to do, and I keep expecting it of them. And that was my talk yesterday about how to carrot and stick them into doing that kind of thing. I know, this is the thing, don't you think, that teachers have struggled with forever? We can call it whatever we want, but to get them, that was in my other talk, to engage meaningfully with the material before class. That's been a conundrum forever. And there are some, with technology, the reason it's a new thing is because we have the ability to do this and this, but we've always had the ability to do this. But that's just too boring for students, but you can trick them into it by having them do those kinds of things. We could talk forever about that issue. having them engage before class starts. Okay, the difference between whether you're going to help the other students, I'm just going to use that terminology, is how prescriptive you are. That's nice. That's a little Mac to PC formatting issue. It's okay, I know you'll forgive me. Technologies can create organization for them. If you tell them on this day you need to do this, even though you're not in class, and this is the first thing and this is the second thing, and we'll keep track of that through our learning management system. It can, I'm hearkening back to that money slide, it can force them to plan. It gives them flexibility with their kids and their jobs and their everything else for when they devote themselves to this sustained learning time. And it gives you an easy way to kind of beef up their vocabulary, whether it's from reading news reports or giving them vocabulary lists of your subject matter, giving them a way to get some assessment points by turning these things in. Depending on your student population, I'm blessed, privileged to work. 70% of my students are pre-nursing students, and if you've ever worked with them, they will do anything for points. If you're prescriptive and explicit, the technologies can do these things, and I'm going to try to show you some specifics. So, as I said before, assigned vocabulary exercises, you don't have to call them that because it's a little patronizing, probably people would say, but you can call them in the news. This is what, I want you to explain this article to me, or for general vocabulary, because we, again, with our contact lenses on, would be surprised how little our students read. The average reading level of a high school graduate in the United States is 6th grade reading level. Much less in-depth reading is being done in the testing culture. It's short bursts of reading and extracting, like Bloom's level 1 or 2 knowledge from that in the testing culture. For that reason, do not rely, if you're flipping or doing online, don't just rely on the textbook, and I say that as a textbook author, on reading assignments, because many of them have trouble extracting meaning from long texts. Use videos, use YouTube, use Khan Academy, mix it up in their pre-classroom exposures. Okay, how many of you guys use discussion board? I was reluctant for a long time to use, I'm a slow adopter. I was reluctant to use discussion boards because I felt like it would just suck me in time-wise, and that I don't know, I'm a touchy-feely, in-your-face kind of person, you can probably tell, and I don't like talking on the telephone because I can't even communicate with just my words like this, with my hands at my side. But once I dove in and did some tweaking of it changed my whole view of teaching, because people who are sitting in the back of the classroom and never speak up. Most teachers are fairly extroverted and fairly comfortable with speaking in front of people. I couldn't believe when I started teaching and throughout my teaching career how when I asked for people to do public presentations, some of them had literal medical symptoms of anxiety and hives, and so to raise their hand and say something in class, particularly when a lot of them are still adolescents, even when they're 20, 21, when you rely on just, class participation points that are verbal and public are very scary for many people, particularly in this group of people. Some of those very people will get on a discussion board and write and write and write and write and write. And I really believe now, I'm committed that in every one of my classes, I allow for verbal participation and informal written participation in the form of a discussion board. I will show you, my first fear was that I'd get dragged in, it would be so much time and everything, because to get them to start participating, you have to assign points to them and stuff like that. Over the years, I found a nice little rubric, and I'm sure all of you have rubrics too for your discussion boards. Now this is from an entirely online class that I taught. It's the best way that, it was my best experience ever. So they had a week to do a module, and they had to post a response to my question. It wasn't a factual question. It was either opinion or something like that, by day 3 of the module. And then they had to respond to at least 2 other students' comments at some time during the week. And then they had to respond to my posts, and my response to them. I only answered like 3 or 4, randomly answered some of them, but they had to look for them. They had to cut. So and people who needed more help, I gave them a rubric. Here's how often you should look at your discussion board. And then classroom register, which means they couldn't write U space SHD space. I talked to them about formal communication versus informal communication, and a classroom register on a discussion board is somewhere in between the two. You can be informal, but you have to use sentence structures and things like that. So all of this, for every student, every week, most of that was automated, graded through this was through Blackboard, where you could pull up how frequently did this person post something. You didn't actually have to. But they're reading each other's posts. Remember yesterday I talked about our expert bias and how the best teachers are recent learners because they remember when they didn't know it and what it took to get them to knowing it. I wanted to print some examples to prove that I wasn't making this up from students. I mean, you don't know, students in my online courses and who are on discussion boards, who talked amongst themselves, basically, and said, and when I had informal evaluations, saying, what do you think about this? This is the best way to learn I've ever seen. I interact that Cheryl is a really good explainer of this, and they talk to one another, and they said, it's so much easier to learn from you guys, like I'm not here, I'm here, I'm listening. So much easier to learn from you guys than it is from Dr. Cowan, and you read it, and you're like, this is a powerful tool that you can't even use in a classroom because of the social anxiety that many of our students have. So most of this was machine graded. I just had to check off, yep, you did that this week, yep, you did this week. And the other thing is it showed me, I was able to interact with students in the classroom who had spoken on the discussion board who wouldn't have spoken in class. So now I'm talking about a face-to-face class with a discussion board. So I can't encourage that enough. Okay. I am, as you know, many of you know, since we're now best friends, I'm a big believer in quizzing before class. Whether you create the quizzes, you use machine quizzes, you use online quizzes from your publisher, your textbook publisher, or whatever it takes, because it's the difference between parched soil and fertile soil when they come in your classroom. Just imagine coming in and learning about T-cell activation. See, and if you don't know what that is, you're like already shaking, right? T-cell activation when you haven't seen any of the material in the chapter, and a lecturer is just lecturing at you about this and showing you some pictures, and it's going by so fast. And fertile soil versus parched soil. Even though you don't know it, what I use online quizzes for is I give them credit if they do the quiz before class, and it's something that's a safety net for them. That's how they view it. I'm viewing it as I've turned their soil into fertile soil so that when I plant the seeds, they will grow. I can't emphasize that enough. And a lot of people use it, but a lot of people make it optional. You can do it again after the class if that's something that you want to do, but I do it exclusively before class. We'll talk about the whole idea of quizzing. This is from 2013. A study that I'll show you in a minute was reported widely in the media that it was a good study, solid science, that the terrible study techniques are highlighting endlessly, reading over and over again, reading your notes. Terrible study techniques, but that's the most likely thing our students are going to do. The best results come from practice testing, things that allow students to test themselves. Flashcards, they seem kind of old-fashioned, that's testing. Doing problems or questions, taking practice tests. Low stakes or no stakes practice or learning activity. You know why? Because there's a space when you're taking a quiz, as opposed to reading your notes, which I'm sure are very excellent. When you're taking a quiz, there's a space between the end of the question and your answer, where you are laying down information in neural pathways, trying to access it the way you will do when you need to access it later. You are practicing that activity. Is that a question?
If you have a problem with flashcards being old school, they're great apps on smartphones.
Yes, that says here.
Okay.
Yeah,
because I've had
online
a lot
app.
of students show me, here are my flashcards, and they go through the
I know.
phone. And I mean, sure, it's a bell and a whistle, but if it makes them pay more attention.
Absolutely, because they
Play
would
with the
do
shiny
stuff on their
object.
phone that they wouldn't do,
Mhm.
absolutely. But I would also say that, our other students, some of them do everything on their phone. They don't have a computer, they don't have a laptop, they don't have a tablet. They take online courses on their phone. Computers are on their way out for this generation. And then there are others, and I can tell you who they are based on the population in my city. It doesn't matter right now, but there are others who are really uncomfortable with phone technology. They can call and text and Facebook, but other things are, apps are. Either way, though, this works, right? And this is the paper that came from, so you'll be able to access it if you want to see it. I remember my talk yesterday. Hey, let's use actual science and research to guide our teaching since we're scientists.
Not all of us.
Oh, you're right. But we're all
I'm with you.
scholars.
Let's try one more.
Ramsey.
Teachers.
Teachers. Right. Now, I mentioned earlier, this is in bold print with a bold arrow because if you're trying to not widen the gaps between other students and your fully prepared students, you need to require that these things happen because you will only widen the gaps. The ones who will do it will not be your other students. They will have other things to do in that present moment. They will have crises in their lives. They will be, one thing I didn't put on that money slide was that they often value relationships over achievement. Now that's not a middle class value, is it? Relationships over achievement. So if your sister needs you to babysit her kids and you have tests, what are you going to do? If you require things and give points for them, you will have a chance of narrowing that gap. If you make it optional, you will definitely widen that gap. Okay, and if possible, quizzing still, make it adaptive. And I talked about adaptive quizzing yesterday. Many publishers have it. And there is also, I think I have here, this is not open source and it's not free, but it's not associated with any textbook. It's adaptive quizzing, which is built by teachers, and you can just use it, whatever your subject matter is. But what I wanted to mention about adaptive quizzing is that, I think I'm going to show you. To me, it's the best learning technology innovation that's come along in a few decades. Several students have told me that this adaptive quizzing stops and directs them to the textbook. Yeah, often, like with my textbooks, and many other textbooks too, you're doing the adaptive quizzing, which means if you're doing well, you get the quiz done quickly. If you're not doing well, it takes you longer. It'll give you more questions worded in other ways. It'll even stop and say, it's best to work in short periods of time. You've been working on this for an hour. Take a break and come back. Or, here's the section of the book that you're clearly not understanding. It'll take you straight to the ebook. I mean, this is a kind of tutoring. It's electronic tutoring, but it's like tutoring. Here's the way I look at it in my little pea brain. So if you look at the kinds of students we're talking about, and you characterize them on any characteristic, whether it's their level of prior knowledge, their cultural background, their comfort in a middle-class environment, their motivation, what their high school quality was, it's all the same thing. I'm going to call them good students and poor students for shorthand. And when your classroom kind of looks like this, you've got a bunch of, well, maybe not as many good students, some middle-of-the-road students, and then you've got the poor students, right? But your teaching can't encompass that whole field. You can't do all that. I call it my cloud of teaching. And it looks more like this. In adaptive quizzing, which means John will get it done in 15 minutes, the assignment. Mary will take an hour and a half. What happens is that Mary's readiness has moved up substantially. Let's say Jose, who's a moderate student, moves up a fair amount.
No, I want to be on top.
Oh, sorry, Jose, I'm so sorry. You're the yellow person.
Yeah,
You're wearing a yellow shirt, that's obviously
That's
you.
right.
And I'm going to tell you, honestly, the very best students, you know them all, they're sitting in the front row going like this. It's mostly busy work for them. But I don't mind. And they don't mind either, because they're happy to get the points. They don't move that much. But look what you've done. Look what you've done. You've made fertile soil, and you have narrowed the gap. Oops. So, a couple other things I wanted to say about adaptive pre-quizzing that's relative to my money slide. It brings a future into the present. Yeah, I got class tomorrow. I don't have time to prepare. Oh, but I have an assignment that'll give me 10 free points. That's something to do right now. It's the present. It obviously refines their notion of accuracy. Many adaptive programs also have a metacognitive evaluation, so that before every question you answer, you have to say, I think I know this, I have no idea, and then you answer it. And so it gives you data about how well you're judging your own competency level, which is an issue with all students, not just these students. How many straight A students do you have who sweat bullets about their grade when they don't have to do that? How many people are failing who are whistling in the dark? That knowing your own level of mastery is a skill, again, that we're fairly good at, and they are not. So this adaptive is teaching them, you thought you were right, and you were right. You thought you were right, you have no clue. You know, and it's kind of a secret component of their preparation. The adaptive quizzing, now the start place is chunking information. I don't know if you've ever read any of the research on chunking information. Teachers and people who are good at school automatically chunk information. This thing is not like the other. This is. This belongs in this section. This does not. Have you ever seen students who will pull out a concept from who knows where and put it in the middle of a discussion, start and stop places, chunking? Adaptive quizzing helps with that immensely. And the whole adaptive part means if you're good at that, you don't need help with that. But if you're not good at that, you're going to get it over and over and over again. And of course, it'll strengthen the vocabulary with repetition of concepts. This is very light, I'm sorry, but these are some of my students. Some quotes. I was worried about amount of work required. And that's true. I have an assignment before every class. But very quickly, they see, and I'm explicit, remember that part of the be explicit and predict, what? Prescriptive. Thank you. I'm explicit. I show them throughout the class on the first day in the syllabus, throughout the class, okay, here's people who did their quizzing and their grades, and the people who didn't, because there will be people who don't, even if you require it, you can structure it with the grade things, that it can make a whole grade level difference in your grade. And people who wouldn't otherwise study or prepare, it just tricks them into preparing. I got a much higher grade than I otherwise would have. So I get testimonials from students who finished the class. I get video and written testimonials from them about doing the darn adaptive quizzing, and I show it to my next class because it's much better coming from them than from me. Winding up here, I'm very close to the end. I want to use it. This is just kind of a throwback to yesterday. If you can find it in your heart to use those quiz results to focus only on the difficult areas and not the things that 99% of the class knew, then that frees you, this is kind of for people who weren't there yesterday, that frees you up to do the kinds of activities that we know result in learning. And be explicit. So we think, and I mean like, here's why I do, here class, here's why I do this. I know it sounds weird to you because you haven't had to have responsibility for your learning a lot of times. You know, you're just constantly being churned through multiple choice tests. And here's why I do what I do. Because I know that you'll remember this. You know, I've got data to show, blah, blah, blah. And just a little bit of explanation goes a long way for them because they're just, the techniques are thrown at them all the time. And a lot of times, you know, like group work. Tell them why. Tell them why you're doing what you do. It makes a huge difference in their own motivation. I wanted to be sure to tell you, in case you haven't heard, again, if you're under a different rock, lecture is the worst way for learning to occur. It came about for traditional anecdotal reasons in the industrial age, and it's really kind of ego-stroking to be a really good lecturer. And some people, you know, some of the most dynamic teachers you ever had were probably fantastic lecturers, but don't forget you're a good student. This is an article from the New York Times, I'll get to it in a second, but the research shows that only 30% of major concepts in a class are understood by the students, on average, when it's delivered in a lecture format. Now, I would say that's because if it's delivered in a lecture format, it's basically delivering the textbook material to you in class, and that's the least efficient way to get your first contact with material. And that the retention time of information learned in lecture is measured in minutes, not years, after the exam. So this just appeared last fall in the New York Times. I just think that if you want to spend just a minute with this, I don't know where she is actually, it doesn't matter. She's teaching introductory American history. Her classroom featured lots of helpful gadgets, all this stuff. But it was missing the wooden lectern. And that's the way she teaches. And she wanted to lecture. Hope I'm not offending anybody, but I'm leaving in 2 hours. So she wanted to lecture, you know, for 50 minutes. And she went on to explain, well, I want to show you this. Yesterday I was talking about Eric Mazur. 2014 studies showed that test scores in science and math courses improved after professors replaced lecture time with active learning methods, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Eric Mazur, who did the peer instruction that some of you saw yesterday, declares that it's almost unethical to be lecturing, and she's countering this argument. And she's right, absorbing a long, complex argument is hard work. In our time, when any reading assignment longer than a Facebook post seems ponderous, students have little experience doing this. So we can agree with that. She goes on to say, some research suggests that minority and low-income students struggle even more. Yes, yes, for reasons we have talked about. And then I part company with her. But if we abandon the lecture format because students find it difficult, we do them a disservice. We need to teach them how to gain all a great lecture course has to give them. And I would submit that that's not our role. Our role is to help them learn the material in our course and help them learn how to learn. But I will accept the thesis that you need to tell them how to learn using the method, whatever method you're using. So in any movement, there's backlash, and so there's the lecture back, the anti-lecture backlash. But I will tell you that the science says, if you want to waste your time in the classroom and see students do poorly, Pam was running over some of the information she had about pre-tests and post-tests and whether there was any movement in her classes and other people's classes, and it's just abysmal when you see that. Just keep lecturing. I know I'm opinionated. But when you don't lecture, and when you give them the material before class that allows them to take responsibility for some of their learning, you have time in class to, here's another thing, they can't construct their own organizers. I know that we do this just naturally during a lecture, but if you have more time to explain them, here's how I thought about connective tissue. So let's think about connective tissue together, shall we? Okay, we've got support connective tissue. So I'm going to make those in categories. That kind of flow chart creation does not come inherently to them. Show them how to do that work. Give them time to practice, because you're not in a 50-minute sprint to get through all the material. They think that learning is easy for us and that we're just too smart. Have you ever had students say, that professor is just so smart, I'm failing his class? And I say, well, they're not that smart because they're not teaching you well. You know, I mean, it's just, they're so smart. They think of us. We don't. But they think of us as other. They think of us as other, like we're aliens. But tell them your trouble. Tell them your story. One of the brain research shows us that one of the prerequisites for learning in the classroom setting is relationship. And you can have a relationship with a student if you tell them, hey, you know what? I had a baby in high school, or whatever it is. You know, it doesn't have to be that dramatic, or I failed a test on this material the first time I took it, and so here's what I did to fix it. I would like this one very much if you're using a discussion board. You know people's names who aren't speaking up, and you can gently, not aggressively, draw them out in a class. And that might make the difference between them being motivated or not, because you just formed a relationship with them, even though they aren't one of the front row noisy ones. So, this is the end. This is the money slide, part 2. Just to go back to some of the things that I said were problems, possible problems, the things I've said during this talk that specifically address them. So for the bridging relationships, these 2 things I just talked about are huge. And putting them in groups can also help that over the course of the semester. View present moment, giving them credit, pre-class assignments, and then that becomes the present moment. I mean, you can't expect to change their whole cultural conditioning or attitudinal conditioning, but you can trick them into helping themselves. And I say trick very flippantly, you know, I don't mean that maliciously. Underdeveloped short-term memory. Quizzing, adaptive quizzing asks for more time for the needier students. When they develop, they're practicing, they're stretching those muscles or neurons or whatever they're stretching. Construct strategies for solving problems. Show them how you constructed the strategy when you had that problem. give them time in groups to show each other and through peer instruction, which we talked about yesterday. Fate versus choice, again, pre-class things, core sorting skills, and class time to demonstrate, and vocabulary emphasis in some way. I know a lot of professors, so I used to be involved in undergraduate education in our national organization, and so I get to travel around and see how other people teach, and I've learned a lot from that, and also witnessed a lot, and a lot of anxiety. Well, we're all under the research versus teaching pressures, right? Or whatever it is versus teaching, for anything versus teaching, time pressures. And a lot of people are still giving a midterm and a final and lecturing. And that is, at the very bottom of the taxonomy of decent teaching. There are a lot of people who give them assignments and then make them all do at the end of the semester so they don't have to deal with them, week in, week in. That's completely antithetical to what my hypothesis is here. We don't have, if you take some of the skills of putting the responsibility onto them, and I mean, even though they are under-resourced, you can use the just-in-time teaching that I talked about yesterday and teach them how to stand on their feet and get the load off of yourself. This doesn't have to require a lot more from you. And in fact, it doesn't. It relieves the workload and the time crunch from you. And I would just encourage you to try one or two things. That's what Paco was saying, he does this, but he wouldn't have done any of it if he wasn't forced to, because it's scary. And I get it, it's scary. But if you try, just do one thing next semester, and then add something else to it the next semester. I'm not even going to read this because it says Trump too many times. Joe Handelsman, famous biology educator, national something or something. Students tell us they leave science for three major reasons. Introductory courses are uninspiring because we put adjuncts into our introductory courses, and that's where they get their first exposure to science, and some adjuncts are absolutely fabulous, but we don't pay them enough to be fabulous, right? Their math skill, and a lot of because there's so many people, it's lecture format. The peer instruction that I showed yesterday, you can use with 7,000 students in your class, and it's active learning. Many math skills. Got any math teachers in here? Okay, that's your issue. Math skills are not strong enough, and many students from groups underrepresented in STEM cite an unwelcoming atmosphere. It's kind of sink or swim. I had to go through I got hazed by my introductory courses, and you will too. And that might have been okay when 80% of our students were successful learners. It's not okay now. We're not going to have anybody knowing any science. Okay, so that's just my bibliography. If you have only one thing that you can look at, I recommend this book, Understanding and Engaging Under-Resourced College Students. It's really awesome. And then don't forget to encourage them. At Christmas time, I make them Christmas cookies for their finals and say things like, "It's a season of miracles." And I'll stop. I know you guys have valuable things to add to. Yeah.
I have a question about the discussion boards. My question was, have you noticed that there is a really, really positive way to start a prompt for a discussion board, or the opposite of that, what ones that absolutely do not work to get discussions going?
Yeah. Particularly early in the semester, you can kind of sequence this. Early in the semester where nobody knows anything, you can get them to something really easy and low risk that has something to do with the subject material, like asking them about, so I teach infectious diseases. what's the worst infection you ever had? Don't tell if it's sex. Or something like that. You know, something fun. You gotta have humor, relatability, and something that they're not, whatever they answer, they're not gonna look stupid. So keep your most anxious student in mind when you pose that question in the beginning. And they'll get comfortable, and then you just amp it up, and you amp it up, and you amp it up. And I ask them to submit discussion questions. Halfway through the semester, I start asking them, what would you like to discuss? You know, and so giving them power and respect, first of all, giving them safety, and then moving into giving them power and respect. I know it's a vague question, answer, but that's how it works for me. And that first question, discussion question may not really give you any value in the course, except their comfort level, which will allow them to learn. Anything else? Yes.
The adaptive quizzing, so is that something that's already linked into certain texts that
Mhm.
people are using in the classroom? Can you design your own with some sort of?
Well, I'll tell you about adaptive quizzing. So many textbooks have it in there, and you know, when I come back again in February next year, I could show you some examples and how to use it. And some textbooks have it. That Prep U is non-textbook related, that you can just purchase, and your students can purchase a small subscription fee for. That's not related to any textbook. The thing is, you can't do it on your own because it is the algorithm, it's artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And the algorithms for bringing back questions that you needed to study and bringing back, and how long you studied. And they're using the results of hundreds of thousands of students nationwide to refine their questions. So, you can try it if you want, but I have no idea how I would go about that AI part of it. So it's worth the investment for that.
I teach an entirely different type of
Sure.
curriculum that wouldn't lend itself, and I usually do reading quizzes at the very beginning of the class session, but I like this idea of backing it out a day or two,
Yeah.
and then no one's reading in a rush right beforehand.
Right.
And even if they can't do this kind of adaptability.
No, yeah, if you can't do adaptive,
Okay.
definitely still do online quizzing and make it due sometime before your class, because we know the more frequently during the week they engage with the material. So this has made my life, on our campus caters to off-campus, very busy students. So we have a lot of 1 day a week, 3.5-hour class sessions. And before learning management systems and online quizzing, you had no control over that. But I can make things due on Monday when our class doesn't meet till Thursday, and then they're engaging with the material deeply 2 days a week rather than 1 day a week. So yes, I would recommend that for that reason. Any other questions, comments? That's it.
It's given that the students that I work with anyway, high school students and middle school students, are the ones that have already been out of the system for years, and they're not likely to recover. So the goal is now what can we do now to address these things that came from the fact that they lacked all those resources.
Right.
Reading time,
Right.
the vocabulary.
Life.
Take a fMRI picture of 2 newborns, and you can't tell which was a poor baby, which was a rich baby. But very soon after that, you start seeing structural differences or functional differences.
Yeah,
in
you
their
can do
brains.
an MRI of their brains and you can tell which.
Yeah, you can tell they're in infancy. And then by 3rd grade, they're failing. Then you add the bilingual education stuff in there and all of this stuff. And so what you wind up with a group of learners that don't know about that.
Right.
And so this is a good heuristic, having tools that you can use that works. One thing I do this, and one thing that I do also is that you can have students that are highly qualified, and we at Arizona State, we're very fortunate. We get a student to the university, we have support systems that enhance them
Right.
so they can
Right.
succeed.
Right.
But my colleagues at the university, including, liberal arts colleges, high-end liberal arts colleges like Smith,
Right.
places like that, they get the minority students coming in. They're the top 5% in their graduating class. They get to this university and they fall on their face because they don't have the academic acculturation
That's it.
that they don't know what the university is. They need that other aspect of it,
Yeah,
and that's where I involve student affairs.
yeah.
So my programs have an academic enhancement, academic enrichment, training, because training works. It's a Vygotsky way. It's the Russian psychology way. If you want somebody to learn something, and they come to you and they're ready to learn, then you give them the tools
Right.
to make that transition,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Agreed.
then you also have to give them the tools to say, this is not for one place. And you can go back to anecdotes like mine. When I went to the community, I didn't go to the university because I thought the university was for smart kids, and I went to the community college. And I kept quiet for a long time because I thought this was smart kids, and I didn't want to fail and fall on my face, so I kept quiet. Then I realized people are asking questions I already know the answers to, and gradually I got integrated, but it took a while.
Right.
And so you got to help them make that transition.
And it's hard a lot. Probably we were, and this is something we share with the type of students I'm describing, they don't want to ask for help. And
Because you don't want to sound stupid.
right. So if a student's not accessing a TRIO program or their life coach or whatever, if they're not accessing that, you as a professor who understands that they're not lazy and stupid or resistant, or if it's something else, and you try to just quietly put in mechanisms, then that self-starter student will, as a tool, they'll use that, pick up that tool and use it and be glad that they didn't have to access specific help.
I've developed an information processing model where in the middle I have the goal I want to accomplish with the students, and in the area of academic enrichment and academic preparedness, that's the center of my information processing model. And then I've got right now about 7 different components that fit into that. Computer literacy is one of them, right? And under computer literacy, what do you do? And then that fits in here. Acculturation, understanding the university student life, and then of course we know that the kids that have the STEM training are the ones that succeed. So how do you make up for the fact they don't have the STEM training? You know that socioeconomic status is very important. So how do you address that? Parental involvement in my model is important. I try to get that. So it's an idea that developing models to serve this population of students that goes across different students that have different experiences. I won't say different weaknesses, they just lack different experiences.
Oh, absolutely.
And you want to give them the experiences. From first generation poor kids to minority kids, we tend to be first generation and poor.
Right. Well, I was telling somebody yesterday, I think it was last year, when Obama made a policy speech that he was wanted to make community college free for everyone. And I was deep into designing retention strategies for at-risk kids and adults. And I just had this pit in my stomach. I said, it's well-intentioned. It's a typical political response. Just imagine that would happen without the retention support for all these people who never would have had access to community college before. It would be a disaster. We would have a much higher graduation rate if we devoted some resources to retention strategies that involve, because 70% of people drop out of higher ed because of life, not because of academics. And we need to support those life issues. But I think that that's often seen as a side dish as opposed to a main dish. Anyway, it's been such a pleasure to be here. One more.